Welcome to Cult Cinema.
The Blob, highly regarded as a B-movie genre classic, and over the years has gained a massive cult following. So today we're going to be looking at the 1958 Steve McQueen in The Blob. The Blob first premiered alongside with I Married a Monster from Outer Space as a double feature. Back then, double features were highly popular. Double features were something that happened when movie theatres suffered downturn in business around the early years of the Great Depression in the US, around about the 1930s. In a move to attract customers, theatre managers would exhibit two films for the price of one. By the 1960s, double features started to become less of a thing. A modern example of double feature film is Grindhouse by Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez. Released their individual films, Planet Terror and Death Proof, as a double feature back in 2007. And since then, double features haven't really been a thing. The double feature, The Blob, was quickly moved up to the main feature since audience were coming to see the Blob film over I Married a Monster from Outer Space. So, what makes The Blob so liked by audiences? Let's have a look and find out. I mean, the opening for this film. Also, this was Steve McQueen's first ever film as a leading actor as well. And this was his last film when he went by the name Stephen McQueen before using his name as Steve McQueen. The film starts out with two teenagers kissing in the car in the middle of nowhere, of course. The guy is being played by Steve McQueen, who was 27 at the time. You can tell he's 27, right? I'm just not the only one, right? And his girlfriend being played by Annette Constant. Then a meteorite lands on Earth. Sure enough, the Blob comes out and doesn't take long to attack his first victim, which is an old man who was prodding it with a stick. Who the two teenagers take. When the doctor analysed the old man, he realised this thing isn't human and isn't normal. And then the Blob devours him and his assistant. The plotline for the film is a simple, standard, classic science fiction film. An alien life form lands on Earth and then goes on to consume everything in its path. And as it grows and grows and grows even more. The setting of the film is within a small town in the US. The Blob escapes and starts to head towards a small town when the teens try to warn everyone, but the town folks refuse to listen, and the teenagers who have witnessed the Blob's devastating power. In the meantime, the Blob just keeps on getting bigger and bigger and bigger. One thing about this film is that for modern day standards of film, it does take some time for the film to get going. But when it does get going, oh boy. The film starts to get going once the Blob hits the town, when the action really starts to kick in. It's a fight of humans versus the Blob. The effects for its time were very good, but by today's standards, not so much in some places, but you know, it was a film that was made back in the 50s. But it does hold a unique charm for that time period of filmmaking. As the Blob stops devouring more people, the most iconic scene in the film is the cinema scene at the Colonial Theatre, Phoenixburg, Pennsylvania. The scene when the Blob enters through the projector room window and the build up to it, it's fantastic. You hear the sound of the screams for everyone running for their lives. The Blob is attacking his unexpected victims. It is such a cool scene to watch. Also, fun fact, apparently when they showed this at the Colonial Theatre, people who were watching the film there felt uncomfortable. Apparently there were some reports that people left the theatre after that scene. I wouldn't be surprised. After this scene, by this point, the Blob is huge. And also, I've got to say a nice touch. I like each time when the Blob kills someone, it turns a darker shade of red to show how much human blood is inside this massive Blob. I thought that was a very cool thing they did, because when you watch it from the start, it's more of a pinkish sort of colour. As the film goes on, it gets more darker red. Really nice touch. So we reach the climax of our film, and basically it's our main characters basically trying to survive against this giant Blob character. The ending of the film, I'm not going to spoil it, but it's a interesting ending nonetheless. The Blob is a cult classic and earned the title of a classic, and the film has such high regards within the B-movie genre. The concept and growing dread will keep you entertained from start to finish. The film is a fantastic visual thing to watch, especially for its time and how they did it. The effects for today are excellent in places, all well done with practical effects. Looking up and how the effects were executed, with all done with camera angles and force perspective, it's very clever. Especially if you're a filmmaker, you really should have a look into how they made this film. The Blob today is still a cult classic and is still watched by many people for many different generations for many different reasons. I mean, the Colonial Theatre has a thing every year called the Blob Fest in the summer, screening the film and have the actual Blob turn up itself. I am not kidding you, the Blob is still around. The Blob will make an appearance, turn up in the pale bucket, which they still kept from 1958. The pile goo is still around, a mixture of red dye and silicone, and has never dried out. Is still kept in the original 5-gallon pail. But outside the Blob itself, this film has had so many influences in media, with homages, references spanning from video games, cartoons, actual other feature film. This film did well enough to get a sequel back in the 70s and also a remake in the 80s. Are we ever going to see a remake again anytime soon? Maybe, who knows. But if it does, I'd be happy enough to go and see it myself. Overall, The Blob is everything you would want from a 1950s classic sci-fi / horror film. It's silly, it's fun, it's entertaining, and overall it is a must-watch film. If you haven't seen this this cult classic yet, you are doing yourself an injustice by not seeing it. If you're a fan of monster films, you're gonna love this straight off from the bat. And if you love sci-fi, give it a watch, you might like it. Overall, I give The Blob a solid 8 out of 10.
Be careful of the blob, beware of the blob, it creeps and leaps and glides across the floor, right through the door.